All right, everybody, welcome to another Developer Livecast live here on the Game Wisdom channel. I am, of course, still Josh Beiser. We have a great one for you tonight. I'm catching up with a game developer. He is, I think, the very first developer we had on for a Perceptive podcast. It seems like centuries ago at this point. And he just happened to remind me before we got started that it's been, I think, 2 years since our last conversation, which is just mind boggling to me. But he is, of course, the owner and lead designer over at Arcen Games. They are, of course, the makers of hits such as AI Wars, Skyward Collapse, and a slew of other indie titles. And he is currently working on AI Wars 2, which had a successful Kickstarter and is going to early access. By the time you're watching this live, it will be next week. If you're watching this recorded, it should already be available. But let's welcome on for this live cast. Here is Chris Park.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No problem, Chris. How are you doing?
Doing good. It's been an adventurous couple of years, I will say. Um it has been a lot longer of a process than we thought it was going to be, which is ridiculous given that it's a sequel to something we spent 6 years making and expanding the first time. And so we thought, yeah, we know we go with this will take half a year or something like that. And nope, 2 years and a portion.
hmm Yeah, I know. We were just, I think, when we spoke, I think either the Kickstarter for AI Wars 2 was either going on or I think it was about to start. I think that was the last time we actually sat down and chat. And
Yep.
just before we turn things on live, Chris and I were kind of like catching up about what's been going on. So I got to fill him in about what's been going on here with the YouTube channel, the book, presentations, and even just be able to do more stuff here. So it's definitely been a very crazy, I think, set of years since we last spoke. But with that said, we have a lot to touch on, as well as catching up. We're going to be talking a little bit more about what is happening with AI Wars 2 and how development has been going with it going into early access. So, now, obviously, we've spoken many times over on the record cast, but this is our first time actually having Chris on live. So, for people watching us or listening live or recorded who haven't seen our previous cast, would you mind kind of giving like a brief background as to like who you are and what Arcen Games is?
Sure. So, I was a business software developer, and I had been making games as a hobby all my life, really. And in 2009, I happened to have a game that was um, marketable, and I did not intend to go into it as a career, mainly because I thought it was just a pipe dream sort of career. I didn't think it was a viable thing, and I knew the
Mm-hmm.
working conditions at large companies were not good. So it was just my forever hobby. So I started, um, you know, trying to get stuff out on what was, let's see, Stardock's Impulse at the time. Later, GameStop bought it and killed it.
Mm-hmm.
But and then got on Steam in 2009 with the original AI War. That was I want to say it 74th or 79th indie. I think indie title, maybe just title period on Steam. Actually, come to think of it, there were not a lot of Steam games at that point.
Oh, yes.
Um, I think it was 74th or 79th indie game. It must have been. Um, and it went off to a good enough start that I was able to stop and do this full time. And um, almost 10 years later, coming up, yeah, 9.5 years later, we've put out, I think, 10 full titles and 12 expansions that were all very large to the various titles. We've been through strategy and roguelike shmup, tactics, turn-based and real-time, various types of puzzle sort of
Mm-hmm.
games, adventure type games. Everything was 2D until um, 2016 or so. Did a game called In Case of Emergency Release Raptor, which was something that was a bit abortive, unfortunately, but that was our first game in 3D. And after that really launched poorly, I released that for free instead and said, okay, that's a tech demo that anybody can have now, and we're going to work on something else. So we've been retooling over the last couple of years, moving into the 3D realm and working on AI War 2. The first one has, I guess it's closing in on $2 million between that and the expansions for it. So that's been our biggest hit with the last iteration, which is a really kind of a simulation grand strategy game. That's been our number 2. So.
Yeah, I know we've spoken about this many times over. I know you've made a lot of post-mortem posts over on the Arcen Games blog about kind of how things have developed for Arcen as a company. I remember, I think this was, after, Valley Without Wind 1, that you talked about just how much of a hit that was in terms of the company. And
Yeah.
it's definitely been, I'm sure you can certainly agree with it, it's definitely been a very interesting case of being up and down when it comes to indie game development.
Yes. Yeah. We've been through essentially the entire life cycle of what it can be to be an indie on Steam. We've never been like a crazy runaway hit like Terraria or something, but in terms of all the different ages of Steam, we've been there through all of those, and we've had both hits and flops during most of those ages. So, yeah, Valley Without Wind was very successful. I think that one has in total earned maybe like $500,000 or so, but it launched in 2011 or 2012.
Yeah.
I can't remember which year, but one of those 2 years. And that was a very different time on Steam, still very heavily curated. And, when that game came out, it was, I think April 10th or 11th, I want to say that it came out. And it stayed on the it stayed on the new releases list on Steam on the very front page for about a month. And it was in the top 10 new releases for at least 2-3 weeks. I mean, because they only put out, 10 games in a month, maybe. And so, yeah, exactly, right? And so there were so many eyeballs that were hitting that. And that was just a very different market to 2015 and after. We did a sequel for that, which we released for free for all existing customers. We basically made it kind of a free add-on, and now you get both of these things together. And that managed to push the project back into the red for a long time. And basically, we got a lot of criticism for the art, and I said, we will do an art update. And then that turned out to be more expensive and time consuming than I thought. So I was like, you know what, we're going to make a sequel, and we're going to change the mechanics and this, that, and the other. And, with the mechanics changes, I don't want to like undo what we had done in the first game. So we'll make it a sequel. But since I said we're going to give this out for free, as an art upgrade, we'll just do the sequel for free. And yeah, that was a bad idea. I mean, it came from a good place, but it was not market savvy. I mean, I figured that losing goodwill was going to be more expensive, but the sequel was not as well received as the first. And because essentially we kind of changed genres. It had been a side-scrolling Metroidvania, kind of a shmup in a very vague sense, and it really turned into more of a Contra-like in the sequel. And so that's very different. And even I think, kind of prefer the first one
Hmm.
mostly. I prefer the feeling of exploration in the first one, but I
Hmm.
kind of prefer the combat in the second one, but it's kind of a toss-up, really.
Yeah.
On a controller, the second one, hands down.
Yeah.
With mouse and keyboard, kind of the first. So, um, yeah, that's probably the pair of those we lumped together because we've never sold them separately. That's our number three group of things behind the Last Federation.
Hmm.
So
And the Last Federation was another very interesting title. Definitely out there in terms of its design. As you said, it was kind of like a simulation, but like I remember you described it as kind of like as a 4X game, but you're playing essentially like Batman in like a 4X
right,
universe. And I thought that was just
right,
insane to try.
right. I forgot the Batman analogy. That's funny, but yeah, you come in like Batman, pulling the strings and interacting with things behind the scenes, and meanwhile, the 4X game is playing out around you like any 4X game does, but you don't get to directly control things, which incidentally, we did two expansions for that game. And in the first expansion, we called that one, uh, um, shoot, some the betrayal something. Why can't I remember this? But anyway, we added a mode called betrayal mode in there, where instead of there being 8 races and you play as Batman, you annihilate one of the races and you have a race of Batmans that takes over instead. So you've betrayed one of the races and taken over, and are propagating Batmans. So um, that makes it more of a traditional 4X. Um,
Hmm.
in in the sense that you control an empire, you're still having to go about things in a way that's different from like the Civ series, because it's a lot more political.
Hmm.
But so there's still nothing quite like it, even when you're playing betrayal mode. I'm trying to think of what would be closest, and I guess some of the Paradox titles, although theirs are like way
Hmm.
deeper than the Last Federation.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
for
And,
good and for ill.
oh yeah. And I guess going back to what you were talking about a few minutes ago, Chris, with being able to kind of be inside the indie space and see how Steam has grown over the last decade. And for people like you watching us live or recorded, it really has changed over the last 10 years. I guess
Yeah.
from where you sit, like, what do you think about kind of like Steam's trajectory so far?
Well, for them personally, I mean, them as a company, them as a platform, they are certainly making more money now than they ever have. So from their perspective, I think they're happy. Their income goes up every year, and their market share is holding pretty steady. In terms of the really large publishers, I think things are pretty happy for them too. It's been, as far as I can tell, equilibrium for them. Although, interestingly, Steam has been able to push a few agendas with them, which I think have been uh, good for the market as a whole. They've been able to push towards not having as much DRM. They've been able to kind of push towards more consolidation of uh, games being available on more storefronts that are, the big AAA titles, aside from like obviously EA and stuff having, Origin and um, but overall, there's been a lot more consolidation. So in that sort of space, when you're looking at AAA and when you're looking at Steam themselves, I think it's been an unbridled positive thing.
Hmm.
When you look at indies,
Yeah.
um, you know, it's a bit of a mess at the moment. Um, you know, uh, there's good things and bad things. Um, at the moment, it's great that it's available to anybody. but it's also a little bit too available to anybody. So that's, you know, obviously the whole green light thing and which obviously has turned into Steam Direct and the
Hmm.
whole, that's been, I mean, Jim Sterling and so on, he's covered that to death. And, I think we're probably all on the same page there. Um, Steam Steam has been making definite strides towards increasing the discoverability of small titles to potential customers that would be interested in it based on the purchasing habits of other small titles for developers. So, I mean, there's been some good stuff in the last year, in particular, where Steam has been, despite the influx of insanity, where they've been, you know, trying to equalize it, let's say, where now everybody can get on, but you find the stuff you want, and you know they kind of did a cart before the horse situation, though, with letting everybody in and then having just insane amounts of content, a lot of which was junk,
Hmm.
some of which, asset flips and so on. I mean, objectively junk.
Yeah.
Um, and then having a lot of stuff of a very, very small potential audience that is not really not really being shown just to the people that would be interested, just being shown as widely as anything. So just big old soup. They just made a giant old soup,
Yeah.
and they did that without actually moving into a space where they could curate that at all. And then they've spent 3 years now trying to very slowly catch up. And I think the fact that the AAA companies were happy and they were still making money, and that you still had indie darlings that were happening and they were happy, and there are more indie darlings now than there ever were. I think that it was kind of a situation along the lines of the death of the mid-list author that happened in the late 90s with traditional print publishing for books, where you used to have all these novelists that you probably wouldn't have heard of if you weren't a fan of their genre or subgenre, but they were making a respectable living doing what they were doing. And the mega bestseller tent poles were kind of covering the gap between the smaller titles and smaller books and you know,
Hmm.
and all that. And if there was a differential of like a lot of you have 20 small titles and 5 of them take a loss on the dance, and 10 of them barely break even, and 5 of them make a little bit of a profit, and then there's the John Grisham novel that more than makes up for it.
Yeah.
But then they started giving more and more money to the John Grisham novels, and pushing the um, pushing those in the limited store space at Barnes and Noble and Amazon and all those places. And um, thank God Steam hasn't done that. I've been really happy that they have not actively tried to kill things. Basically, they haven't been actively after it. They've been negligent for a while and just kind of studying
Hmm.
from afar, seeing what they could glean by what happens in the Hunger Games that was going on their site, and
Hmm.
and then they're like, okay, maybe we won't have toddlers in there. It's like, thank you. There's toddlers were getting murdered. So it's just um, it's been an experience.
Hmm.
It's definitely.
Yeah.
I don't really know what to expect. I think that it's going to continue to gradually improve for people like me, and gradually get harder to get in for somebody who's just absolutely new. And I think it'll stay about the same for people that are making the Terrarias and whatnot of the world. So,
Yeah. I mean, like you said, Chris, there's just so many games being released these days. It's insane. Like we do a live show Sunday afternoon, and part of our segment is we go over like weird games. We look at the upcoming lists and the bottom of the barrel in the subscribe some of the games that we've brought up. And for people watching, if you think the term hentai doesn't show up a lot in the new releases, it does. It shows up quite a bit. Sometimes 5 games from the same developer all coming out on the same day. It's just
That's is that in particularly increased since they did their not safe for work uh,
I haven't
thing.
seen like any slowdown, at least on the press site that I visit. But yeah, it's still pretty regularly happening. But
Well,
as
I
you,
mean, they made it so that they could have like
yeah,
full adult games that you didn't have to get like a uncensored patch from some other site.
yeah, like I'm
Um,
still seeing them. Like I don't really see too much difference, at least from where I'm sitting.
I would
But
figure there'd be more,
yeah.
really.
But
But
yeah, there's just so many games being released, and the problem is that, and I'm sure you can agree with this as well, that it's becoming a lot harder to separate, the bottom of the barrel from legitimately good games,
yeah,
and even not even just legitimately good games, maybe just like diamonds in the rough. Like, I
yeah,
picked up a few like on one of the weird game segments. I was just looking through. I saw a game that just in between all the crap, and I'm like, this may actually be that not that bad. And I try it out, and there's a review or a first look of it on the site, and I really enjoyed it. But again,
yeah.
like that was just me like putting my finger on a page, going, okay, what game should I try and look at next? And
Yeah.
it's just getting very hard to sell. I think a lot of these unique concepts to the consumer.
With some of those indies that are just starting out, they've got absolutely no budget.
Mm-hmm.
They've got absolutely terrible graphics, maybe their interface isn't the best.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they really don't know how to explain what the heck their game
Yes.
is. Maybe they don't have a great grasp of English, whether they're a native speaker or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but maybe they made something really killer that with polish they could make even better, or that
Mm-hmm.
they could use that as a launching point. You can't tell those anymore.
I know.
I mean, it used to be that those wouldn't be on Steam, but
Mm-hmm.
that there would be like kind of the BMT micros and the other secondary website things, and they would
Mm-hmm.
kind of cut their teeth there and gradually, hopefully, find a following. A lot of times through affiliate programs with other developers, it would be kind of vetted by other developers who were like, "Yeah, I'll let you advertise your game on my
Mm-hmm.
site," and eventually, hopefully, they would get on Steam. And now there was a period there, a long period, where the bar was too high, and a lot of people just could not get on Steam, even once they were being pretty
Yeah.
successful in the other ecosystem. And so this was like Steam was a kingmaker, and it was good for me because I was getting king made because I
Mm-hmm.
was on there the whole time, and uh, we never had Steam turn down one of our games since the first one. They turned it down once, then they a few months later said okay. But so I was kind of watching this and talking to peers who were not on Steam, and they were super frustrated, and I totally got that. And that was the bar was too high. But then they were just like, we can't figure out where to put the bar. Let's just have no bar. And so now
Mm-hmm.
the situation reversed, and
Yeah.
um, there is essentially no bar at this point. And um, Steam Direct was never a bar, and Greenlight, if anything, was kind of there is a bar unless you're willing to act unethically, in which case there's no bar. And of course, that just meant
Mm-hmm.
that all the unethical stuff made it, and
Mm-hmm.
the regular developers had to either live with that and hope for legitimate success through there, or go to the unethical practices themselves. So that's yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad they got rid of that at least.
Yeah. And like I'm still annoyed that Cryptic Comet, Vik Davis couldn't make it on the Steam. Like he was during that era you just described. That there's no way he was getting on, and it was during that period where you had to
Yep.
know somebody, or you had to have that big enough sell that Steam noticed you to begin with.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if things would have, how much things would have turned out differently if he started maybe like 2, 3 years later in that different ecosystem.
It's interesting because he may not have been able to find as much of a following in the outside ecosystem that he had. And I actually, when I was first doing AI War, I actually reached out to him and was like, "Hey, would you be interested in publishing my game, like as
Mm-hmm.
part of a Cryptic Comet thing?" And he was like, "No, I really am not doing that." And I was like, "Okay, I'll
Mm-hmm.
figure it out myself then, I guess." And then I wound up being on Steam and he wasn't. And I think I said something, like, "Hey, maybe think about this guy to Valve," but honestly, I'm not sure, and I may not have because I may not have wanted to rock the boat with,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, Valve, and so I cannot remember what is. It's shameful how long it's been since I've talked to him. Like, how has that gone for him? Is he
Not.
still making things?
I don't think so. I think
Uh,
No, we're getting Empires. A Cold Chronicles, I think, was the last game he did,
hmm,
and he like I think I was like one of the last people to actually do an interview with him. This was like 3, 4 years ago, and then he
yeah.
kind of dropped out. I heard that he did some kind of collaboration, possibly for another game, but I don't know how that actually turned out, and I haven't heard from him since, sadly.
I'll have to get up with him. It's been too long, and
Mm.
I remember um, him being intensely frustrated.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, he had another source of, he had another job. Which I don't know how much he talked about
Mm-hmm.
publicly, so I won't say anything about it in particular. But I know that he was happy with his other work, and I don't know that he completely wanted to give that up. I'm not sure how much of him saying that was due to the fact that it probably wasn't feasible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I mean, you know, it wasn't a super duper dire,
Mm-hmm.
uh, from what he said,
Yeah.
situation there. So, I mean, I'm sure in life he's still doing well, but I would like to see more titles from him.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe something will change again. I don't know
Yeah.
for
Uh,
him.
and I know it's definitely hard, I think, for a lot of developers, especially with just how much things have changed and kind of like, I guess, like the dance of being an indie developer these days, where it's not just about you making a good game anymore. You have to have the PR, you have to do the whole YouTube track, you have to have social media presence. And for a lot of people, that can be very hard to do. Like, the thing that I do with Game Wisdom now is I basically say, you got an interesting game out there? Send me a key. I'll look at it. I'll put a video up. I don't care. Is it going to
Right.
be like is it a crazy roguelike? Is it a 20-minute long management sim? I don't care. If you are you having trouble with this getting this game out there? I'll do what I can from this end.
Yeah, and that's a really valuable thing to the consumer as
Mm-hmm.
well, to be honest, because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's, there needs to be places that curate the sludge and that say, here's stuff that's interesting, especially from new developers who
Yeah.
haven't been doing this for 5, 10 years. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I feel like, uh, I feel like it is at least more democratized now.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that there is a YouTube circuit and that there's the Twitch streamers and um, so many more influencers, that's really been a positive development in the last 10 years
Mm-hmm.
because it used to be that you had to impress basically a couple of people at Valve. You
Yeah.
know, Anna Sweet was the gatekeeper for everything at Valve. At that particular time. And then there were just a few people. And, you know, there were a couple of people at Greenhouse that were vetting that. Greenhouse, if anybody doesn't remember, that was Penny Arcade's
Oof.
indie games store. And it was really hard to get on with them. And I actually finally got an okay with them for one of our titles. I don't remember which one. After 3 years of dancing around with them, trying to win them over with one of our various titles, and got an okay with them. And then the next month they shut it down. So we actually never had a title actually on there, even though we had a signed contract. But I mean, you know, which is, they didn't break the contract or anything. It's just bad timing. But the back then, you know, there were maybe 40 websites, generously speaking, that mattered for getting coverage, and you know, there weren't really gaming channels that mattered. This is 2009, you know, and so basically, I remember going through and having to hit up all these websites and saying, like, you know, oh, so and so reviewed this, and said this and this about it. Wouldn't you like to review it? You know, not in those words, but along those lines. And talking to Impulse and talking to Valve and saying, you know, hey, this has been getting good reviews, or hey, this has been selling this amount. You know, wouldn't you be interested in this? And really having, it was more of a B2B type situation there, where I had to really impress upon a small group of business people that this was worth covering to them, and that there would be some sort of financial return on their end for covering it. I wasn't going to be giving them any money. I didn't spend a dime on advertising or anything, but they had to feel like it was worth the time. They would make money back on clicks or, you know, pages in a magazine. In a few cases, you know, wow, they still had those, you know, and, you know, were worth the digital storefront space. There was a lot of manual legwork on the part of their staff at any of these stores back then. It was like a couple of days out of a salaried employee's time to get a game onto the store, if not more. And, you know, nothing was self-serve. You were constantly giving them a build and they'd put it up there or whatever. And that's so foreign now. But now people can go on the YouTube circuit. They can find, you know, somebody who covers like just hentai games, let's say, you know, and, you know, probably they can find 30 different sites that cover just hentai games, you know, and I picked that because that would never have flown before, you know, that just, none of those larger sites would have even covered that, and those particular sites still wouldn't. So it's interesting because now there are more skills maybe that you have to have now, but I don't really think there was ever a point where you didn't, unless you were just lucky. And lucky meant knowing or bumping into the right person, or being convincing with just the right person at the right time. You know, and the only reason that Steam actually said yes to AI War at first was because, or not at first, but after 2 months, was because I'd had a lot of success on Impulse, partly because that was Stardoc's store, and they had Sins of a Solar Empire and so on, which is a space game, very similar audience to AI War. And so we did really well on that store. Go figure, you know, something that didn't happen to mesh with the audience of that storefront as well. Those titles were just selling terribly on there. So most indie games on Impulse sold very poorly. For me, it was the number 2 storefront by a long shot. I mean, granted, we only made like $32,000 with them over the course of a couple of years, but which is, you know, peanuts compared to Steam. We made twice that in the first month on Steam. But but still, that was the number two by a lot. Now, the only things that have eclipsed that are GOG and kind of Humble. Um, and you know, now there's more opportunity. Um, there's a lot more opportunity, but there was this magical golden time that came 20 more 2012 to 2013, maybe stretching even into 2014, where Steam was taking more people and there were more influencers. You started seeing the YouTubers that were having an influence and so on. Some were having a big influence. There weren't as many small YouTubers that were making a big difference. And there was this kind of golden age where, to me, that was the best time to start up an indie company if you didn't happen to get lucky. But yeah. So, oh, Discord is funding devs for release exclusivity. That's interesting. Their storefront. I haven't gotten on that yet. Is that I meant to get in touch with them. I'm not sure what they're. I'm excited by them. I do want to say, and I don't remember. I haven't personally talked to them. I'm not sure if Eric has from our company. I'm sure he must have, but I want to start working with them once. I guess my big fear with some of these places, if they're not selling a Steam key, is that I can't be sending them, a 7 gig build, 5 times a week. So, with the pace of updates that we do during early access, they've got to have some sort of client to make that a little bit easier. And I just don't know what Discord has at this point. GOG has GOG Galaxy, and I've been talking to them about what might be possible there. But even there, it might work out to where it's too much of a bump in the rapid early access cycle. Because we put out 3, 4, or 5 releases a week, to where we wait until 1.0 before going with them. I'm just not sure. But I'm really excited about Discord, actually.
What do you think about there's another big store that came out over the last few years, Each.io. Have you done anything with them or looked into that front?
Everybody says they're big. It's interesting.
I know.
I I don't remember, honestly, if we've done anything with them. I don't recall getting any checks for them. Let's put it that way. It was they don't seem to be a player from where I sit at the moment. They don't seem to have an audience that is distinct from the audience that I can already capture on other storefronts, I guess. Let's put it that way. For somebody who's just starting out, that might be different. I don't know. But there's enough overlap with their standard audience and the other audiences that I have, that it didn't seem to make sense. I've worked with, I'm going to say 20 different storefronts at this point, because I used to have an attitude of don't say no, because you don't know what the market share of these places are going to be. And there's a lot of stores that I would get like $50 a year from, or something like that, mostly off of a title that was making like $1.5 million on Steam in the same time. Not $1.5 million per year, but you're making like 300,000, let's say, in the same time frame on Steam. And so quickly became a thing of like, okay, well, if I'm going to spend X number of hours getting stuff set up with them, reviewing the contract, making sure that there aren't any gotchas in there, which often there were, where I'd have to request, contract terms changes, and to where, there was usually a kind of a painful setup thing where I had to learn their store API and get stuff over to their people. And they want their images in a slightly different format. The scale is different and everybody's different on their, so to where it would take, a couple of days of my time and go, okay, is my time worth getting a return of maybe $50 to $100 in a year for spending a day or two of my time? And I make more than that, in a day. And so it's kind of like, okay, if they're not having some sort of clearly viable marketplace, then I'm just not interested. I'm sorry. And each.io, how do you say there? Each.io, is that how you say it?
I just say each IO. Really,
Okay.
I'm sure anyone watching this recorded or live will throw in the correct pronunciation down below.
Yeah, but anyway, however you say it, they seem to have a cleaner platform, but not a more viable audience than a lot of these other places. They seemed like Desura, but better. And we did, gosh, I don't. I guess we got a little bit of a payout from Desura. Since the indie, what was it called? Indie. It was one of the bundle things. Indie bundle. Indie.
Yeah, I think I remember that. Wasn't there
Yeah,
a
it was.
not on Steam bundle too at some point?
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, that was a specific event, but there was a. It's like they had daily indie bundle, and maybe it was. Gosh, I don't remember what their name was. Indie Royale. Indie
Okay.
Royale. I think. I think that was them. Indie Royale was one of them. Anyway, I think basically they got bought by Desura or somehow were related, so we got paid through that. But for doing a thing with them, and it was actually a pretty profitable bundle. But I also remember there being money outstanding, and you know, it's kind of funny with the distributors and so forth. At least once a year, I'll get a letter from some bankruptcy company, law firm, bankruptcy proceedings. If you've got any claims against this company, then get in line. I'm like, yeah, they owe me $30, but I'm never going to see a dollar of that because, I'm definitely not on the preferred list of claimants with all the various who knows what investors or whatever they've got. So it's just like, well, good to know. In the trash it goes with the other ones, but yeah.
And I know there's been so many different storefronts that have popped up and then they died. And it's just getting very hard. I mean, this could be its own podcast in of itself about what it means to have like a successful store like for these digital games. Like how much curation really is needed. Because as we talked about earlier, Steam went the route of let everybody on. I mean, what could
Right.
possibly go wrong there? And we
Right.
kind of saw what happened there. Um, I've been talking to a storefront, Jump, Play on Jump. They do like streaming of video games, kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah.
Very interesting. I don't know how they're doing right now, but they seem to still be going strong. But
There have been a couple of ones along those lines
yeah,
that have popped up and then disappeared. I can think of two that I actually partnered with as far back as 2011 or 2012, maybe. They don't exist anymore.
yeah.
But I hope somebody has success with that, whether that's Jump or otherwise. I don't wish anybody ill at all, and I want to see a healthier marketplace. I think that would be great. But and we've had success with some, like Green Man Gaming has done pretty well for us, and um, Shoot. Um, there was another one that started with a G that did pretty well for us too. Obviously not GOG, but well, and Gamersgate has done pretty well for
Mm-hmm.
us. Um, the It's interesting. One of the ones that I actually really gave a hard time and eventually didn't go with, feel kind of bad, is Amazon. I made them rewrite so much of their contract. We went through contract negotiations for
Mm-hmm.
about 3 months straight, and all these clauses I had them change because they were kind of predatory,
Mm-hmm.
and or just ambiguous and thus could be predatory.
Yeah.
And um, they were like, yeah, we want to get stuff on here, and they must have been like, this guy is totally not worth it, because I was not worth it, but neither were they. And so it was bunch of just a bunch of nothing. Um, it was a real waste of time for them and for me. And they don't even do that anymore. They sell some Steam keys, I think, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but their like storefront that they were excited about launching, that is not in existence anymore. Which I smelled, and I should have not bothered even with the contract negotiation. But I was like, it's Amazon. I should like do this, and nope. So GOG, they're interesting in that they're curating a little hard. Um, there's they're still leaving the bar a little bit too high. I think it's interesting. They carry some of our games and not. It's called Twitch now.
Yeah, I think Amazon
Seriously?
bought Twitch, or
Oh well, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but their other thing no longer exists. So I
Mm-hmm.
mean, whoever was in charge of that department and that software project and unit, that business unit no longer exists. So I mean, they tossed it, and yeah, I forgot they bought Twitch, but yeah. So we'll see what they do with that. Hopefully they,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah, it makes sense. I think they'd kind of run into the ground. But I don't. When did they buy Twitch? That was a
Ooh,
couple of years ago.
yeah, I think at least two, maybe a little more than that. Again,
Yeah,
we're both
this
out of the
tanked
loop
maybe.
when it comes to these things.
Yeah, it was maybe 2014, I want to say, that this was tanking with their other thing. So I guess there's a couple, at least a year or two, where they kind of saw the writing on the wall. Never really got it up and going. But GOG, in terms of their curation, um, it's interesting because they still refuse to carry our game, Starward Rogue, which I'm not really offended by. I mean, my feelings were a little hurt. I guess. I mean, there's no denying that. But they weren't ever like, oh, this is a bad game. They were just like, that sort of genre doesn't sell on our platform.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, all right. I mean, especially not if you don't carry the games.
Yeah.
But and I mean, they have a point, I'm sure. But this is one of those cases where it's like too much legwork, I guess, on their end to get a game. Like, there needs to be a Steam that has all the games on it that somebody would reasonably want, that are above a certain quality bar, but that isn't artificially limiting out like shmups or hentai games or whatever. I keep picking hentai games because that's something that is demonstrably limited
Yeah.
in audience. Maybe that audience is a mile deep, but it's very narrow audience,
Mm-hmm.
and you know um, that's not really my bag. But for people who enjoy it, I don't see a reason why they shouldn't be able to buy that on the same storefront they buy,
Mm-hmm.
Call of Duty or whatever.
Yeah.
And going, oh, we don't really sell shmups very well, or you know, we don't agree with hentai games or whatever. Um, that inherently means you have to go to two marketplaces to get what you want, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the appeal of Steam, is you can pretty much go to Steam and the thing is there. That's not really true of any other storefront, except for the ones that sell Steam keys. And so it would be nice if there was a storefront that um, didn't have all the garbage on it, but that did carry everything that was above a certain level. And I mean, like Starward Rogue has sold terribly on Steam as well. It's barely cleared $120,000 in like 2 years, and we've spent more making it than we've gotten out of it, and so on. It's doesn't have quite enough user reviews. It's closing in on it, but if it had like another 100 user reviews, it would be at the overwhelmingly positive level on there. So I mean, it's done a lot of things right. It just was too small of an audience, I guess. And I don't really think, to me personally, it would make a big difference bottom line wise if GOG was to carry it, which is part of why it doesn't offend me more. You know, it might make a few $1,000s difference, maybe, but ultimately, it's more a matter of what it means for their storefront. Not just that game, but all the other ones that kind of get vetted out. They still have a pretty high bar, which I appreciate their idea of quality. But as soon as I was saying that, you know, Starward Rogue, they've said no to, then I had customers that were wanting it on GOG that already had it on Steam, but they wanted to do like the GOG Connect thing, Steam Connect, whatever it is. And they were going, but XYZ is on here, and this is so much worse than Starward Rogue. And I'm like, yeah, now we're getting subjective, though. And, yeah. You know, and my game Shattered Haven is on there, and I think that is an objectively worse game than Starward Rogue. So, I mean, you know, that's one where I can step in. And the market feels like that's an objectively worse one. That one is, I think, sitting at mostly negative. Which is a shame, but yeah. So I mean that one, not well liked by the market, doesn't sell well. It's on GOG. What you gonna do?
Yep. And again, like you never know, like how these games are really going to do because we've seen
Yeah,
developers try and I guess quote unquote play the system with trying to make whatever is the most appealing game right now. We've
yeah,
seen this obviously with all the Minecraft clones, now with
mm,
Battle Royale, and so on and so forth. And it just becomes that endless chase for a lot of people. I think, as like a tangent area, I see that a lot with what's going on with YouTube, with people trying to become successful making their own YouTube channel. I mean,
and having a specific style.
yeah.
Yeah, like mimicking a style that they saw somewhere else. Yeah,
Yeah. And I keep like making fun of this when I say that whenever I see a news piece on a site, I know the same 10 people are going to do the same 10 videos about that same topic.
yeah,
And it just becomes very hard, I think, again, for like, not, I would say again, like the cream still rises to the top. Like your Stardew Valleys, your Dead Cells, stuff like that, that's going to do well no matter what. But for the
and
games that,
it depends.
yeah,
There are arguably some things that die that shouldn't.
mm-hmm.
I can't think of anything right off the top of my head, but there were definitely some things. Well, one of them was, um, gosh, um, it was a tactics game. It was a 2D one originally. It did very well. Um, Drawn a blank. Um, Mode 7 Games made it. Oh,
Frozen
crud.
Synapse.
Frozen Synapse,
Okay.
yes. Frozen Synapse did very well. Frozen Synapse 2 did not do as well as it should have. Uh, People can argue all they like about how it compared to this first one or what the market was like at the time or whatever, but um, that was one example of something that should have gone a lot higher that just really really didn't. Um,
Hmm.
so that being said, I mean, yes, you do get the Stardew Valleys and so on. So I mean, um, it does make me kind of wonder what else might be missing. Because I mean, um, Stardew Valley is so polished and everything. I love that game. But when I think of like Terraria when that first came out, it wasn't as
Yeah.
polished as it is now, or as Stardew Valley was. What would have happened to Terraria if it had come out now?
Hmm.
I mean, and let's say that all the Terraria and Terraria-like stuff hadn't happened, right? So clean slate. It's starting. It's not a clone of anything. Does it take off and sell 2 million plus copies?
Hmm.
That's not a sure thing to me
Yeah.
today. Like it deserved what happened to it, but just I feel like there's a luck factor. There was always a luck factor, but the luck
Hmm.
factor is a little harsher now.
Hmm.
Perhaps they might make more now if they'd released now than they would have then. It's hard to say. I mean, the top games are making more now than they did back then, but yeah.
Yeah, and again, it's just getting so hard for I think games to really sustain themselves over the long term. Like I know we've talked about this many times over. The idea that once a game is released, like its shelf life is maybe like 30 to 60 days, on a good day kind of thing. It's probably even less now in terms of like that first, being on the front page and stuff along those lines.
Oh, yeah. I mean, your front page is, yeah. I mean, you're lucky if you get a couple of days,
Hmm.
to some extent now, but it's all about the discount promotions, really, because that's what bumps you up. And then there's a lot of, really, it's all about the wish listing. Anything that can drive wish list, then when you go on a discount promotion, then the bunch of the wish lists convert,
Hmm.
and you get more people that come through there. And the discovery queue and all that sort of thing has been really good. There's a lot of analytics that Steam has now about where traffic is coming from. All that stuff is really good. Um, there's still a long tail with titles, generating income. It's maybe a third of the volume of what it used to be. So the line is about the same. The curve is about the same. We just shift the long tail part of the curve down to about one third of what it used to be. For your mid-list author and down, let's say. For your greatest hits type thing, they have a different shape of graph to begin with. They're like Stardew Valley or any of those sort of titles. I don't even know what the graph looks like, but I can tell you it's not the hockey stick. Um, so um, it's it's a weird it's a weird market. It's not one that I would really recommend for somebody to try and like make a career in if they're like don't have a fallback plan.
Hmm.
Um, and I wouldn't, freshly invest like tons of money into making a new game if you didn't have, some manner of um, bailing out basically that wasn't going to harm you or somebody else. Um, so but if you make something as a kind of a passion project and you're okay with it not making a return, which is incidentally how I started too, because nothing made a return when I was doing it. I was just making it because I wanted to make it. I didn't even think I was going to sell it. And then it was like, oh yeah, all right, well I can sell this. Oh, I'm making money. Hey, this is my job now. But you know, I think that's the mentality people should go into versus the people that come in with the mentality of, oh, this is going to be my job. Um,
Hmm.
that's a real roll of the dice.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've spoken to Jake Burgett a few times from Gray Alien, and
Mm,
yeah, it's very tricky to know, when you can make that jump from either like a hobbyist or a part-time to a full-time game developer. And as you were saying a few minutes ago, Chris, regarding like Terraria, like I was thinking about this with like Cuphead. and the amount of time and money they spent on that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I keep saying like it could have gone either way. They could have, we've got the timeline of them being a huge success, but they could have just as well lost their entire house and owe
Yes.
Microsoft who knows how much money.
Probably they wouldn't have owed them anything because most likely, since they're being published by Microsoft, that's a good example of a situation where nobody really loses.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Microsoft would have lost a bunch of money, but to Microsoft, it's not a bunch of money. It's
Yeah.
just some money. And that gets, when you start talking about publishers, whether they're giant or they're kind of mid-size, if they have the money to quasi gamble, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of like don't play with money you're not okay with
Yeah.
losing. And occasionally you'll have money that you spend that you get back a ton from.
Mm-hmm.
And then other times you just lose it. That's all right. We lost that money. And for the people that made the game that they lost money on, those people got paid at least some while they made the game. They got a shot at their dream job. Didn't work out. Time to do something else. That stinks. That's heartbreaking, but they didn't lose their house or something,
Yeah.
and they, you know, they don't owe massive money in bankruptcy proceedings that people are never going to get back. So I mean, that's kind of the best um, case situation as far as I'm concerned. But
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, there's yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think with that, we've been already been talking for like over an hour now. We haven't even gotten to our main topic yet. But again, like I expected this, and Chris said before we start, we'll just go until we run out of things to talk about. That may never happen here.
Yeah, you'll see our bleached skeletons on
Yeah,
the
exactly. But before we move on to talking more about AI Wars 2 and kind of what's been going on with Ark in the last 2 years, I guess one final question to kind of sum up this section regarding kind of like sitting here and talking about the indie side of things. There was a piece on Polygon a few weeks ago by the time people were watching this recorded. We talked about this regarding the idea that they said about there are too many indie games being released these days. And I just want to get your thoughts on this. Again, as someone who's been on the outside as well as inside, like staring at all this, like what do you
Mhm.
make of that? Do you think there are too many indie games, or do you think that I think maybe like the quality people are expecting? I think that bar has been raised.
Um, that's a complicated question, and I don't think there's an objective answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's kind of like too many for what?
Mm-hmm.
Too many for all of them to make the kind of living they want to make on there. Too many for all of the studios that make them to keep making more indefinitely. Um, yeah, that there's too many in that sense. There's not everybody's going to make a living at it, and not everybody's going to be able to keep making more titles. With Arkin, I have had to lose all of my staff, just me now, and I actually still lose money every month at the moment. Have for the last 2 years. Um, if I hadn't been as slow letting go of staff, then I wouldn't have lost money the entire period. But revenue's been falling, and when you don't release titles rapidly enough, then that's what you get. But in terms of, I don't blame that on the market though. That's kind of me reaping what I sow to some extent. Of just we didn't get enough out rapidly enough for people. But um, in a grander scheme, we're seeing more tiers now. Really, is what it is. And when people think indie games, are they thinking of Stardew Valleys that seem like really just this completed perfection of a title, or are they thinking of something like Dwarf Fortress, which is got an abominable interface, but is just this absolutely grand thing that you cannot find anywhere else, that may never be completed, but is, um, you know, um, my train of thought derailed. But anyways, it's premium in its own way. Is I guess my point. It's just so giant that a game that was, AAA or quote premium indie, that just had like top line indie level graphics, would be just smothered under the weight of that project. So, if those are the only things that we kind of imagine, then the things with the rough art or the rough interfaces or the bad tutorials or the, you know, just other issues wouldn't show up. And I think the VR space is pretty interesting right now because it's a much healthier version of the wider indie market. Now, granted, there's not enough VR customers to go around. So you got that problem. But in terms of the stuff that's being created, there's not a whole lot of absolute dreck, but there is a lot of stuff. There's some stuff that's premium, some stuff that's premium indie, and there's some stuff that is um, really rough indie but fun. And you can find it because the storefronts are not over cluttered because there aren't enough people targeting that market. And um, the divide between the really top games and the stuff that's really rough in some regard is not too it's not too large of a divide, because there's this whole other element with VR of how does it feel? Like, is it responsive? What do the controls feel like, and all this sort of thing? Because it's really easy to make a game that feels terrible in some fashion for VR, even if you've got some giant budget or giant property, giant for a VR title budget, and versus you can have something that's just very minimalist that feels amazing because they've just polished it. And those experiences are all small. There are very few that have like just hundreds of hours of content or something. I'm not aware of any, actually, because there's not enough of a return on making something like that for that to happen, and so much time has to be spent in polishing every darn last bit of it because of the nature of how you can literally make people just feel ill if you're not doing it right. Basically, you can get VR sickness off of that, aside from it just feeling noticeably off if you don't do it right. So, are there too many indie games? For some people, sure. And there's too much stuff that I can tell you what there is. There's definitely too much stuff that is not an indie game, but that is on a storefront. The asset flips, the little junk projects that just really aren't something that anybody would consider saleable. Those are too cluttery. That is 100% a fact. If you remove those things and we can finally see everything else that should be there in some fashion, there's more than people can make a living at. But that was true of books for forever. I mean, well, not forever actually, because it was actually a pretty rarefied field for people. The barrier entry was high with having to be able to get with a printer and having the money to do it and having the language and the ability to type and blah blah blah. So I mean, yeah, all right. Since let's say the 1960s, that's when a lot of the kind of pulp printing really took off with novels, with genre fiction and so on. So since the 60s, there have been a rise in the number of books to the point where there were too many books. And I don't think that there are too many books at this point either, but in terms of the number of people who want to make a living making books, writing books, um, not remotely all of them can do it. They can do it because they want to leave some sort of permanent mark in the world, but they're not going to make a living at it, a lot of them, even if they write something quite good. Um, and that's just something you have to accept if you're going to try and be a novelist or whatever. We don't have this situation yet with screenplays or movies because those things are really expensive to make. So the barrier to entry is still too high there. But, give it another 50 years and maybe CGI is so cheap or something. We have virtual actors or something who do, who knows? Something we're not going to think of right now that makes movies like really easy and cheap to make. And there's everybody and his brother's got a superhero movie out. Oh, have you seen Bob down the street? He made a new thriller. Whatever. Um, you know, it's going to be different. Um, the I don't think there's a good answer to that. I think they made an interesting article. I don't think it was a bad article, but when I read that, I was just kind of like, well, okay. I just like, that's your opinion, and I kind of get that. Yeah, it's too crowded. I don't like it, but I wouldn't want to go back to 10 years ago either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would agree with you there too. Just in terms of being able to get these games out there, and even like the ease of development has, I think, changed a lot. I know
Yeah.
we mentioned this earlier in this cast about. I mean, these days you can have like anyone pick up Unity or Game Maker or even people who are really good pick up something like Unreal and try and make something out of it. I mean,
Mhm.
again, that wasn't anywhere feasible 15, 20 years ago.
And there's a ton of other little engines for specific purposes, like
Oh yeah,
platformers or whatever. It's like
RPG
Kill Liger,
Maker and
RPG Maker. There's a ton of them, and Coco's something or other, and yeah, there's a bunch of those, and yeah, and I mean, I think that it's a double-edged sword, obviously, but I think ultimately it's a good thing. We're going to cut ourselves on it, but we shouldn't not have fires just because you get burned every so often by the fire. You just learn how to deal with the fire a little bit better, and you know, ultimately it's a good tool. Um, so right now we're not dealing so well with keeping the fire in the fireplace, so to speak, because we've got asset flips and junk like that's happening. But and people putting Bitcoin miners or whatever inside their titles. But
that's probably a story for another time there. But I think with that, let's move on. I think to part two. Again, we could sit here and reminisce for our next few hours easily.
yeah,
But I do want to spend some time, obviously, on AI Wars 2, and again, what is going on with that. So I think that's where we'll spend the bulk of our conversation. I don't see, unfortunately, too many people joining us live, so I'm hoping when this goes up, recorded next week, we'll get some interesting questions that way.
yeah, and I'll be happy to answer those. At the time. It's
Mm-hmm.
everybody being in different time zones. It's hard to gather people. So
Of course, yeah. But with that said, when it comes to AI Wars, and again with AI Wars 2, I mean, the first AI War game, it has been in development for a long time, way beyond 1.0. How many expansions are you up to with the first game?
the first one has 6 expansions. So its final version, current version is like 8.024 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
We incremented the version number to 2. We went on to Steam and it had better graphics and some other stuff. And then after that, we went up by one version number every time we released an expansion.
Mm-hmm. And again, like the game has become massive. I think you said earlier that it has earned like about like 2 million in profits or more or around there.
Yeah, it's earned about 2
Yeah.
million.
Now, when we last spoke, again, 2 years ago, which again, I still can't believe it's been that long,
Yeah.
you guys were just coming out of, I think either you were either going in or you were just coming out of the first Kickstarter to AI Wars 2.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely be talking about that one in the next few minutes. But just for people watching us, either live or record right now, who don't know at all what AI Wars is, what's kind of like the ballpark pitch for like people watching us?
So AI War in general, both the first and the second game, are a game where it's a space-based RTS game with kind of grand strategic influences, and um, there's 80 or more planets out there, most of which have been taken over by the AI, and basically the war has already been lost. You start with typically
Mm-hmm.
a planet. You're playing as humanity trying to weed out the AI that has taken over everything. And so there are a couple of planets that you need to go to and basically defeat the boss on,
Mm-hmm.
more or less. Kill the. In the first game, it was called the AI Home Command Station. In the second game, it's the AI Overlord.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to go and destroy those things, but you are nowhere near strong enough to do that at the start of the game. So instead, you try and expand and do raids and find. You both take territory as well as sneak into the enemy territory and pull out stuff that you need. And there is a mechanic called AI progress, which is kind of like the hate meter to some extent, where the more you raise that, the more difficult the AI gets. So the AI has its own style of economy and style of logic that it uses that is um, asymmetrical to what you have. And if you basically aggro it too much, then it will murder you. And so there's one element of it that is a little bit kind of puzzly strategic, where if you over aggro it, then you're just going to probably lose unless you're playing really, really well or on a
Mm-hmm.
difficulty level that's too low. But assuming that you're playing on a difficulty level that's in keeping with your general skill and that you are not over aggroing it, then it plays fairly when it has units on the loose that it's able to use, like units that aren't guarding. It has like 20,000 units at the start of the game, so it could just bum rush you and you're
Mm-hmm.
insta dead. But it's not allowed to use most of those. It's only allowed to use a few, and it reinforces and so forth all over the place as you go out. And basically, you're fighting a guerrilla war. And when it has kind of a sub commander that becomes aware of you, then that AI is able to do whatever it needs to do, and it plays by the same rules as you at that point of tactically and on the strategic map. What am I going to do with this? And so there's different sub commanders that have a variety of pieces of AI logic that drive them. And yeah, the game takes 3 to 20 hours to finish one campaign in, and they're heavily procedural, so you can play tons of them. We've got a lot of people with like 600 hours in the first game, and a lot of people that feel like they're just kind of getting into mid-level play when they've got 100 hours in. Um, so it's very much its own beast.
Mm-hmm. And again, as you said, you've had about you had 6 expansions to the game, and they've all added in new units. I think a few of them, I think you added like new like mega events or factions as well.
hmm Yeah, I think all of them, after starting with the third, they all started adding in factions that were we called them minor factions. They basically change up how the game is played in some manner or another. So they might be somebody that is there to like help you every so often, or somebody that you can kind of find and they hate everybody, or they interact in a certain way with things around them. So basically, if you like go and aggro the Dyson sphere, then it hates you. But if you go and you save it, then it's friendly for a while. And there's a variety of different things like that. And we added some different scenarios, like these nebulas that you could explore and things like that. But the second game, we kept a lot of the most interesting aspects of those, and we've really dialed the factions up to 11 with the base game itself. And so we don't have as many factions or as many ships as we did in the first game, plus 6 expansions. But in the second game, the factions that we do have are way richer and way more complicated, and they're able to get even more complicated if need be. There's some marauders which are able to be either hostile to you or allied to you or just hostile to AI or hate everybody, whatever. They can actually take territory and build up. They have their own style of economy that is asymmetrical to you and the AI, and they will gradually build out and can actually win the game themselves if you let them get away. They start out with no territory, but if you give them an inch and then let them keep taking it, then you can really run into trouble. But it's really cool because you can actually use the ones that are hostile to everybody, give them an inch on purpose where you want them to have an inch, and then hope that they start taking a foot, over in the AI's territory. And then as long as they don't get too strong, you get them butting heads with each other. And in the second game, we actually have the concept of AI progress against other factions, not just against you. So for instance, the Marauders could really ramp up the AI progress against themselves, and the AI is therefore getting stronger, but pissed at them and not as angry at you. And so the Marauders in that situation have made the overall situation worse. The situation, they've made themselves stronger as well, to where in that scenario specifically, they've made the situation more dire with the AI. They've made themselves a threat, and but they've somewhat taken the heat off of you. So it leaves you a situation where you can kind of come in, and as long as you can get those AI overlords, that's a victory condition for you. And so if you do that while the Marauders are about to murder everything, you still win because you've saved humanity, even if there's bad humans out there doing bad things. We're going to add in other victory conditions later on. All of that can be modded in, actually. The Marauders actually are a mod, but they were a mod created by a guy who's become a volunteer developer. We've added that into the whole game. And a lot of that you can do with open source C# code that gets dynamically loaded, as well as with XML. And so you don't really need any real special tools. You don't need any tools that aren't free. And we've got other factions as well. The Dyson spheres are back and are way stronger and more interesting. We've got this thing called the Nanocost, which is kind of like the Borg in a lot of ways. They sweep through and do a lot of interesting things. And there's this thing called the Macrophage, which are these kind of giant cellular creatures or organisms, let's say, that spread throughout kind of the host territory of the AI. They kind of infect the AI in a different way and can cause issues. And you can throw all those guys in there all at one time. It's just, chaos, which is actually kind of cool, because then it starts feeling even more 4X-y, where it's just like all these factions doing things, with these wars going on that have absolutely nothing to do with you, and it may never affect you. And you're just like, all right, the Macrophage and the Nanocost and the AI are having a three-way duke out over these planets in this totally other corner of the galaxy. And I guess that's fine, because the AI is therefore diverting reinforcements over there that I don't have to deal with. So yay, maybe, unless one of them really wins, comes over here, in which case, no. So, there's a lot of interesting stuff that can happen with that. Um, and there are there's half a dozen or so factions at the moment, and I hope to see more modders doing interesting things with it, and we'll do interesting stuff and expansions too, I'm sure. But the we dropped the minor from the name factions there because they're no longer minor. They 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 really have outgrown that title and have become a major driving force towards the game, feeling like it's more of a living system than it used to. With the first game, I was really big on making it so that you always had the tempo in the chess sense, and that was good. But it tended to make it feel a little bit more tower defense mixed with puzzly in some respects. And there were, from time to time, and it really depended on how you played. With the sequel, you can have that. I do want to be clear. With the sequel, you can have that exact same style of experience where you always have the tempo and so on. You just don't turn on certain factions. And if you want to have like a fake second player, like that's AI controlled, just turn on friendly marauders, and it's like having a buddy that you can't actually talk to. But they're there and they're doing interesting things, and so you can still have all sorts of varieties of the same experiences as before, but not just that, because that would be boring. Instead, you've got this whole much larger universe of emergent activities that wind up happening, because they all have their own type of AI, their own goals, and their own style of economy. They don't gather. Not one of the other factions gathers resources the way you do. Not one of them has the same types of unit caps that you do. They have unit caps, all of them do, but their unit caps, all of them work differently. They have each one just works completely differently. And they're all very rules bound, and the fact that they are makes it so there's a lot of interesting bouncing that can happen.
Now, one thing that I want to touch on that you said, I think it's also part of the tagline for AI Wars 2, is kind of like the puzzle aspect of trying to beat the AI and stuff along those lines. This is one of the more trigger aspects I kind of had trouble understanding myself. So I was just wondering if you could go elaborate a little bit more on how do things evolve beyond just I take my big mass of units, move them into the system, and then I just sit back and watch things blow up.
Right. So we call that fleet balling, and that's definitely been a problem in the first game in particular. What it basically boils down to is if somebody's able to fleet ball, then they were playing on a difficulty that is below the level that is actually appropriate for them. However, typically those same people, if they crank up the difficulty, they just get murdered because they tried to fleet ball, and of course it doesn't work there. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. I said that before in terms of double-edged sword. That's overusing that whatever cliche, but it's kind of a tricky proposition because there's all sorts of weird things you can do that are suboptimal if you're playing on a difficulty that's too low. And so how do we make people do something that's more interesting, really? And so when you get to those puzzly aspects in the first game, that's a situation where, because it was so nuanced and you had to kind of do a lot of wiki reading, or at least follow a lot of tutorials, or go through the lengthy tutorials that are built into the game, because there's this high barrier to really playing at that level, that meant that some people would just go, yeah, I'm going to play here and I'm going to fleet ball, and that's the way it is. And that really kind of loses out on the soul of the game. And so with the sequel, for somebody like you, for instance, who's intelligent and is able to actually like see the problems and problem solve if they're presented in front of him, but if there's something that's like go around your elbow and read the wiki and 5 hours of tutorials, you're not necessarily going to get that. um, for that sort of person, that's where like turning on lots of factions is a really great thing for somebody like you in the second game, because um, now suddenly the galaxy is alive. You have factions that are moving here and there. Various ones of them are taking um, systems at various times, and various ones are losing them at other times. And a lot of it then comes down to there are multiple things going on at once that you just can't react to by keeping your fleet all in one ball. And so you need to split your fleet and maybe do a couple of things at once. And you need to keep some fleet at home, although also turrets are a big win early in the game in particular. And that will let you um, basically defend against whatever blowback there is. There's a lot of times a blowback. You attack the enemy, and that stirs them up. And if they know you're going to win at that planet, then a lot of times they'll run away and they'll join what's called, used to be called the threat fleet in the first game, but now we actually call it the hunter fleet. It actually has a slightly different color, and you can tell that the main sentinels from the AI have donated past a certain point. They're like, we don't know what to do with this. Hunter, you take it. And so they give it to the hunter fleet, and that thing basically waits out in the wings and will strike at unfortunate times. And it has its own AI and its own set of rules, and it actually has its own economy of sorts, because it kind of lives on donations from the main AI fleet. There's also a warden fleet, which is kind of the defensive counterpart to the hunter. And so right there, the hunter and the warden are always present, because they're part of the core AI. And so right there, you already run into situations where you may need to leave some forces behind to deal with the hunter, or just to prevent the hunter from coming. Because if you don't leave enough forces, then the hunter goes, aha, there's a weakness and it can take it. And that comes to the intelligence gathering of the AI. There's a certain amount of general knowledge that it has and that you have on the galaxy map that shows like what is the strength of all the forces at the various planets. And so it's not a cheating AI in that it knows too much. It knows the same stuff that you do. And there's other things that neither of you know, unless you have ships, boots on the ground, basically. But at any rate, so it's able to watch for that sort of thing, rather like you would watch the position of pieces on a chessboard. And so you have to think about, you can see, unless you're just not scouting at all, you can see where the hunter fleet is. And you can go, what might it do from there? And okay, therefore, where am I going to put my stuff? You can also find out where the warden fleet is and kind of keep an eye on that. Go, okay, this thing is going to come and try and defend, and it's huge, and I could attack it head on. And what would happen if I do is that I'm going to be just burning through the metal and having to refleet, as we call it, constantly, where you're just churning out ship after ship after ship to go to the front lines and die, and then another one comes back out. And you can do that, but it's highly inefficient. And there's a thing called salvage that happens where if you're just throwing money at the problem, basically, then salvage is basically like debris, but positive, builds up on the planet that this is happening on. So if the AI is doing it to you, yay, you get to mine that salvage, and it's an extra source of income. If you're doing it on the AI's planet, boo you because the AI is getting all that. So it behooves you to win a little bit efficiently. I mean, not super duper efficiently, but you should try. And so a smarter tactic would be to say, okay, I've got one force over here that is just acting as a deterrent for the hunter, perhaps, and I've got another force over here that is enough to draw the attention of the warden, but not, it's just kind of what I can spare. You send that in first, and the warden's like, oh, no, you didn't, and comes over there. And then hopefully you're drawing the warden far enough away, and hopefully you're able to live. Your secondary force is able to live long enough for it to get to you. And then your main force comes in and punches as hard as it can. Now, in the second game, we have a different system of attack bonuses that create kind of a rock, paper, scissors situation, same as the first game had, but it's a lot less complicated. The first game, it was so complicated that you pretty much had no choice but to just, whatever, it's too complicated, just put everything in. Here, we're still balancing it, but it's based on principles that make sense. So, for instance, you've got these, instead of just basic fighters, we have these things we call V-Wings, and they have a slowing effect on ships that they shoot. And they're fairly resistant to getting insta-murdered. So throw those forward, and they can basically provide a screening shield for your other units, which can fire from a longer range potentially. And so a really, really easy strategy is to say, V-Wings, you go ahead, and you, like concussion corvettes in particular, you guys stay back here and fire from range. You don't have to do that. You can just put them all in a big ball if you want to. However, you will take far, far, far fewer losses. And it's really like intuitively obvious, hopefully, when you see, okay, these guys slow things and they survive a while. These guys have a really long range and they die pretty fast. Send these guys up. So hopefully that occurs to a lot of people just naturally without them having to be tutorialized on it. I think it actually is mentioned in the tutorial anyway. And the tooltip for the unit mentions it. And there's a lot of other similar types of units where you can soften one thing up and then bring in something else, or that there's certain type of turrets or whatever over here, and these guys are resistant to it, and these other guys aren't. Send these guys, don't send the others, because sending the others, it's just gonna get you to take extra damage for no real reason. So that's just dealing with the AI and dealing with the way that the unit bonuses are now. Hopefully that alone gets you to do more than just fleet ball. But when it comes to the throwing in the other factions, then you've got things like, if you've got Astro trains on, you've got trains that are making delivery to a depot, and that's going to not take a whole lot of guys to go kill, but you have to go to a specific place to do it, and you have to travel through hostile territory that has XYZ characteristics to get there, and you've got to make it in a certain amount of time. If you want to prevent some bonus to the AI, or get some bonus for yourself, then hi-ho, Silver, go take these guys on that train robbery, and they can go do that. Meanwhile, you're not going to just focus on that. They can handle that themselves. The AI for the units is pretty good, and so, send them. Trust that you sent the right units, and micro as you need to, if you need to. If you realize you made a mistake, or that the AI goes, "Ha, here comes the warden," or whatever. The units will even auto kite on your side during those periods. There's a limit to how intelligent the kiting is. It may kite out of one frying pan into the fire of another thing, so you may wish to have them directly kite by manual orders. You can even queue that up and send them on a merry chase in a way that you've queued up 3 minutes worth of move-in orders, and then go do something else for a little while, and you're like, that's going to be funny. And so anyway, that's just Astro trains. Those are a real simple one. You may have the Marauders in there, and you have some forces that you've developed that you have specifically set aside just to periodically aggro and periodically defend against the marauders, making sure that they stay just pissed off enough, but not so powerful that they are messing with their hopefully AI neighbors, and you are not getting messed with yourself. And so, um, given that you have finite resources, in other words, like you have a certain ship cap,
Hmm.
that basically means that you're either limited in how you slice this on time or how you space this on attention. So are you going to do a fleet ball and you go, I'm doing marauders now and I'm doing, train robbery now and I'm doing this now? Or are you saying I'm doing all three of these things at once, but with part of my forces at any given time? And so you can technically slice it either way, but the more factions and so on you put in there and the harder difficulty you crank up, the more you have to attention slice and the less you can time slice.
Hmm. Now, one I wanted to talk about, like what you just described there, Chris. That's a lot in terms of understanding the game and trying to build it up. And one of the challenges I know that you talked about on the Kickstarter, and I'm sure has been mentioned many times over on the Arcen forums, is trying to make this accessible to someone who's never played AI Wars. I know I've told you this before, but like when I tried to play the first AI Wars, all 6 expansions on there, I load things up. It's like I have like 5 different pages full of ships, turrets, buildings. I'm like, what the hell is this thing that I'm looking at?
Right.
And even by the time for people watching this live right now, I've spent about 40 minutes with AI Wars 2 so far. I'm going to try to get a more involved look later on this week. But like I was still having some level of trouble just like staring at, okay, I have these 5 different ship types and I see like there's like 8 or 9 different turrets I'm looking at, and it can get a little daunting, especially for a new player to come in and think, okay, what am I actually aiming for with this? Because as you said, as I'm no doubt aware of, again, the idea behind the fleet ball or the unit stack of Doom, that has been a tried and true strategy for a lot of RTS or even turn-based strategy games as well. So how are you approaching trying to make AI Wars 2 a lot more accessible compared to the first game?
So a lot of it has to do with the interface, and a lot of it has to do with removing redundancies. So we had 600 some units in the first game. In the second game, we have like 130 maybe. And that first game plus all the expansions. And so that's a culling to about a six. We took kind of the cream of the crop of what was most interesting. We do have more that we're going to add. We will probably creep that up to 200 by the time early access is over. Uh, excuse me. But the idea is to not give you too terribly much all in one go, but to instead say, okay, well, since this is procedurally generated, you see, you know, a slice of that every time. And with a lot of the like factions and what they do, a lot of it comes down to being able to observe them and then having some tooltips on their units that say what it is they're doing. And I've described to you how they act,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of it for a player who's coming to it blind, I could see them either wanting to go on the wiki and kind of have a general idea of what's going on, and the lobby as well says in general what they do. But um, being able to just go in and kind of observe what these factions are doing and notice when there's an opportunity is something that I hope makes the process easier. Did you play the tutorial in the new one?
Yes, I did. I think I messed up. I broke the path, the pathing on the tutorial on my first play because I
Oh,
built turrets that used up the energy, so I couldn't build all the units that I wanted. Because it said in the tutorial, you have to basically build all the units in the dock or that were required to move on the next step. But because I built
Mm.
energy, or I used the energy for the turrets, it actually I couldn't get that energy back to finish building.
Oh, you could have scrapped the turrets, but yeah. Um, that is a fantastic piece of feedback, though. I just made a note, and we can adjust that so that's not possible. I mean, it's one of those things where it's large enough that people can shoot themselves in the foot without even knowing they're doing it. It's not like you
Mm-hmm.
did anything wrong, but um, it's our job with the tutorial and so forth to try and avoid having people shoot themselves in the foot. With the actual core game mechanics, we made it so that there's a fewer steps to do a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
He
and
was
so
watching too.
yeah, oh, he was. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah, that's some of that sort of feedback that we need in early access. One of the reasons we go to early access instead of going to 1.0 is finding out that sort of thing. So
Mhm.
you running into the bayonets means somebody else won't.
There you go. My job is done here.
But yeah, so the idea is that with some of the things where it took like 2 steps to do something and you had to know, okay, this step happens. And then once I've done this one step, then that opens new opportunities that I wasn't even aware would happen. We just make it so that step 2 is available and you skip step 1. And
Mhm.
that sort of streamlining really doesn't affect play. Um, and we haven't had any of our hardcore players that are upset about any of the things we've changed. They've all just been like, yes. And you're like, okay, well, clearly that was the thing to do. So that's been good. Because I was really worried for a while that people would have the impression that we were kind of neutering it to this really,
Mhm.
um, just taking away what made it interesting and making it too simplistic. So
Mhm.
fortunately, that hasn't been the case where anybody's had that perception. Actually, I take that back. We did have quite a while during the development of AI War 2 where it was way too simplistic. And it wasn't really because of, well, some of it was because of that sort of streamlining, and some of it was because of other mechanics changes we made. So it was way too simple for a while. Um, since about April, when we did what we called the pivot, we did a big design shift
Mhm.
and made a whole lot of design changes, taking the best of what we'd been doing in AI War 2 up until then and what we had done in what we call AI War Classic, first game. Between those two things, we've arrived at kind of a greatest hits version that is taking the best of both. And since then, we haven't had a situation of people going, oh, this is too simplistic. So we actually had, yeah. So in the current iteration, let's say, um, one of the things that I'm trying to lean on a lot is the objectives tab. And I don't know how much time you really spent clicking into
I
that at all.
Not a whole lot. I obviously clicked on just like going through every tab on the tutorial,
Mm-hmm.
but I saw, like I mentioned, gain a few planets, mine all the science of so and so, that kind of thing.
Right. So those are the basic I think they're called like beginner tips or something like that. And so during the really early stages of a game, like first hour or so, half an hour, depending on how you're playing, it gives you kind of the basic pointers. You're gonna need, unless you're playing a really weird way, which an advanced player might, that they would
Mhm.
just ignore these tips. For any sort of kind of middle of the road, um, 80% of games, you're going to need to do these things. And so um, it gives those sort of tips. And then it gives you all of the longer objectives of like, okay, here are opportunities that we found out here, and here are threats basically that we found out here as well. You may want to be aware of the threats. Then for threats in particular, you'll also bubble those up to the top of your screen. Such and such is attacking here. There's a train going from here to there. There's marauders invading over here. Maybe you care. Maybe you just want to let them win. Whatever the case. Um, those sort of things that are really acute threats get bubbled up there. But there's some more kind of longer term threats that stay in the objectives tab. And the idea is you can kind of plan out a middle term strategy. Like, what interests me here? Like, I need to get stronger, and here are the categories of things that I have scouted and discovered that will make me stronger. Which of these sound good? And then where is it? And oh dear God, is over there? Well, how do I get to there? And is that worth that? Maybe I'll go for the thing was my number two choice, but it's so much easier to get. And so you kind of, that's one of the places that the game, there's a certain type of person that is just going to kind of hit a wall eventually, where if you're not going into it with the mindset that it is a little bit of a sandbox and you have to kind of make up your own
You have to
middle term goals.
kind of go with the flow, essentially. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, like I think that's one of the big differences. Like when we look at something like StarCraft or Age of Empires, where there is a fixed solution to this problem. I get to age 4, I build my siege units, I steamroll the enemy. Like I have a pretty solid checklist of step 1, 2, 3, 4. I get
And a
there, I
lot of
win.
that,
Yeah,
yes. And a lot of that stuff is self contained.
yeah.
So you can stay in your own territory and kind of push your territory as much as you feel safe
Hmm.
defending. But otherwise, hang out where you are and just optimize what you're doing at home versus AI war makes you leave the house.
Yeah.
And that's scary to begin with. Because you leave the house and what happens if nobody's home, and so
Hmm.
um, that makes you play a lot more like a grand strategy game like 4X, where your goals are kind of unclear. I mean, the ultimate goal is you want to become stronger, and
Hmm.
it says at the top like critical goals or whatever. It's like find the AI
Hmm.
overlord or overlords, and kill them.
Hmm.
They're here, kill them. And you look at them and you go, yeah, I can't kill that right now. So, all right, time to get stronger. And there's a certain kind of checklist that, depending on your play style, if you play in kind of the common most 40%
Hmm.
style of play, then it's like, all right, you probably need like 8 planets, maybe, let's say, and you need to have unlocked maybe 3 to 4 bonus fleet ships or or starships. And you may have wanted to unlock an extra turret or something, but you don't have to. And um, you should have gotten all the science from all those planets and have some Mark IV versions of some of your ships, enough that you can really bring the pain on the
Yeah.
AI. And if there's some other goodies that you saw, like some golems or Lost Spirecraft or something along those lines, if you have those factions on, then hopefully you have those as a centerpiece along with your arc for your forces. And then it's time to find a staging planet near the AI homeworld. And you know that you're not going to be able to take it all in one go. You can wound them heavily, but there's never a point where you're just like, I'm just going to walk in here from the other side of the galaxy and I'm just going to murder everybody and
Hmm.
I win. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so you have to find some sort of staging area that has the appropriate risk versus reward
Hmm.
value for you. Like, how much does this aggro them? How hard is it to take? How easy is it for me to hold after I
Hmm.
take it? And how close is it to actually letting me refleet? And how much
Hmm.
pressure constantly can I keep up on that overlord once I'm making that assault?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the end game flow, and that requires a different level of thinking, I think,
Hmm.
than um, it really requires you to look at the situation and react to that,
Hmm.
and then build your own middle term plans. And there's a certain inability that we have to really correctly
Hmm.
um, give pre-generated middle term objectives that you definitely want to do, because it takes a human mind to look at it, go, the context of this is something I don't like. The context of this is something I like. And it's almost like deck building in some respects. You deck build for a while and you adjust your position for a while, and then you strike and hopefully win, or you lose. Because sometimes you do all that, and then once you aggro that overlord, it leads to a spectacular loss after 13 hours of playing, and you go, but I'll get him next time. And that's, or you save scum. Either way. I'm not judging, but there have been some epic lose at the last minute sort of games. So in terms of making it more accessible, we've tried to make it easier for people to read the battlefield and to, both the local planet battlefield and the galactic map. And we've tried to make it a lot easier for them to know what the objectives even are. So that objectives tab is just far and away above anything we had in the first game, and it gives you tips and thoughts about under what circumstances you might want to do this, and that, and the other. We're I'm sure going to build that out even more based on feedback we get from people who maybe are still lost. And right now it's pretty much focused on the early game, and then the very end of the game of like, you must kill these to win, and here's what you should probably be focusing on for the first half an hour, and then also exposing those possibilities to you of what you might want to take as middle term goals. But it doesn't really advise you too well at the moment on middle term goals past the early game, and we'll probably need to make that more of a thing. That'll kind of crimp playstyle a little bit for some folks, but that's just advice you can ignore. So I think that if we hit kind of that core 40% style of play, which is basically somebody who's half turtle and half reckless, that's kind of the balance that you need for that 40% style. Then I think we'll be good. There are people who are hyper aggressive, and you have to turn down the difficulty to even be able to do that. And those people play as basically a domination style, where they're going to take everything. The galaxy will be mine. I'm not touching the overlord until I have all 100 planets, or whatever the planet count is in that particular galaxy. And that just can't be done on difficulty like 7. Usually you have to go down to like 5 or 6 and then still be very skilled, because you've just cranked up the difficulty in a different way. So you can do that, or you can be super duper minimalist and try and take no territory and work by being poor but keeping the aggro incredibly low, so the AI is poor, and then you are basically a scalpel. And so the scalpel players, that is hard to do too, and a lot of the best players are scalpel players. In order to play on the very highest difficulties, you kind of have to be, and I can't even write a tutorial for that because I can't do it. I'm not good enough to do that, but other people are, and that's great. So that's kind of what it comes down to. Is ultimately, I kind of hope that people go into it with the right attitude of, I'm going to make some middle term goal. In an ideal world, people understand how to read the battlefield, so they know what's happening. It's like looking at a chessboard and knowing what it means to see the chessboard and where the pieces are, versus like, what does the horsey do again? If you're going, what does the horsey do, then you can't possibly formulate a strategy. But not knowing like in-game prefab move by move. You don't necessarily have to do that in order to be able to enjoy playing chess. Some of the most fun I had playing chess is when I was not as good at it and would just kind of go, let's see what happens when I do this. And sometimes it would fail spectacularly. And sometimes it was like, wow, I did not ever think of that. Hey, look at that. Oh, yeah, that's called a fork. What? Oh, all right. Wow. I have stumbled upon an actual strategy other people use. All right, cool. Now I know what forks are. That was a skewer. What? Oh, cool. Well, all right. Now I feel like I'm inventing chess. That's the best feeling, right? And those sort of games that allow for creative freedom are my favorite, and that's one of the things that in an ideal situation for the right personality and somebody who's like just not feeling pressure to win, but just there to see what they can do, that is the ideal way to approach it, I think. And a lot of 4X games and grand strategy games are that way. If you go into playing like most of the Paradox games, but like why am I drawing a blank on the name of the
Europa
I'm having trouble.
Universalis, Crusader Kings.
I was thinking of Crusader Kings. Yep, either one of those work, but Crusader Kings I was drawing a blank on the name of for reasons unknown. You approach that, and it's very much what I just described for AI War, except you're having to read a different kind of battlefield that involves a lot of submenus and a lot of you're taking in information and you are seeing what sort of story develops. And in that one, it's a story of people and your personal empire and your brother-in-law's wife that you stabbed because he slept with your son or whatever, And those are you're kind of creating this interesting story of that sort. With this one, it's more like you're creating the story of what happened to the last forces of humanity, whether they won or not, and the weird empires that came. And when people approach it like that, and I think a lot of civilization games kind of boil down to that sort of situation as well, where kind of what you want to do at the start of a Civ game, and the general, this is how you play Civ, and you do that sort of thing. Then you run into some sort of neighbors, and they do something, and in response, you do something else. What is that? It depends on the game. Maybe you're friends, maybe you're enemies, maybe you're fighting a lot, maybe you're really not. The kind of easy out that Civ has that AI War doesn't is that it has those alternate victory conditions where you can eventually go, you know what? I'm not going to bother trying to figure out the strategy that it would take to wrangle my way through this complicated political and military situation and win by force. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to I've had fun getting to where I am, but now I'm going to pursue tech or culture or whatever it is I'm closest to winning at this point, and I'm going to focus on that. And so that kind of gives you an easy out from what could be a much more difficult just military game if it didn't have those elements. And that's basically what happens with AI War, is imagine that you hit mid-game of Civ. It's like, no cultural victory for you. You got to stick this thing out. It's like you don't have to murder everybody. So you got to figure out how to murder enough. And so that would, maybe during early access, something that we discover maybe is that we need to have alternate victory conditions sooner than later that lets you basically reach the mid game and go for some sort of cultural victory. I don't really know how that would work at the moment. I haven't really thought that through, but it's just kind of a thought. As I was sitting here explaining this, it's like, that is the difference, is that there's not this kind of release valve late in the game. You just either win or you lose, or you stall. So maybe we need that as kind of an anti-stall relief valve. That'd be kind of interesting. I don't know. To see what people think about it. That's But yeah, it's a matter of trying to get people in the right mindset, trying to give them the information they need, and then um, trying to make it so that the situation is interesting enough for them to kind of push on through it. Particularly if there's other factions going on, you're like, well, I don't know how to kill the AI overlord, but I do want to get these marauders. How can I get strong enough to beat them? And then once you've done that, then maybe you're like, well, I'm kind of closer to being able to get the overlord. So, what if I got one more fleet ship? And it's like, well, I might be able to take him. What if I just took a planet near him? And it's like, hey, I've invented how to go kill the overlord. you know. So, um, it's kind of that walking yourself into it by accident situation is what I hope will happen, thanks to the factions. But that again comes back to part of the early access process is us finding out where people stumble as they hit later and later into the game and how we can help with that.
Yeah.
During the pre-early access period, this whole last 2 years, it's been a matter of getting people out of the early game, out of that first couple of hours and into the regular game proper. We've finally gotten that to where that is in a really good state, and where the game plays nicely. But
yeah, and there's still like so much we can unpack right now. We are, according to my clock, just over 2 hours into this talk, and again, we could stay here for probably another 2 hours with all the fine points. Two that I really want to talk to you about, Chris. One would have been about trying to, as you talked about earlier, was streamlining the amount of decisions a player needs to make and keeping the hardcore or the challenge of AI Wars 2 without having the cumbersome nature. I mean, that's a good 30-40 minute chat. And the other part I wanted to talk about, and maybe we can save this for a part 2 if you're free in like the coming weeks. I would love to ask you about, as you said, in April you did a very sharp pivot in terms of what AI Wars 2 is now compared to where it was at previously. And I really do want to spend some time talking about that, but I don't think we have the time to do that tonight.
I will mention we pivoted again in July, and so that kind of we were going one way, and then we said, oh, we're just going to go right back to the way the first game was because that was better. And then after we had a couple months in, we went, all right, now it's fun. Let's bring back in some of that stuff that we had, plus some new ideas, and so we did. And so what we have now is very much a hybrid of the first game and ideas that we had previously had for the second game that weren't panning out in isolation on their own. So it makes it. People were worried that it was just going to be the first game reskinned in 3D, basically, once in with a better interface. Once we did the pivot, and when we did the pivot, we were like, I think that's all this really can be. Like, we just deviated too much, and then we passed the pivot, and we're like, oh, actually, no, we can do all this other stuff. So that worked out well, but makes the conversation even longer.
Yeah. And I would say maybe, like as we said, by the time people are watching this recorded, AI Wars 2 will already be in early access. Maybe we can set something up in like a few weeks after you've kind of seen the fallout going on early access, and we'll have more of that discussion there about kind of how the audience is reacting and how these changes are evolving the game.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, Fallout, I like that.
But with that said, I do have, I guess, a few just quick wrap-up questions. Again, this will be more in lines about what's happening right now, the AI Wars 2, and then we'll say goodnight. And yeah, again, Chris, it has been a pleasure talking. Again, like we've been talking for 2 hours now. It just feels like we got started, and that's This is definitely more of an old school podcast for like newer people watching this live recorded. This is like kind of what we used to, just like 3 hour channel on game design. That's about it.
Yeah, I was always your longest.
You and
one because I always liked coming on and such good description, such good. Discussions always here. So.
Yeah, you and John Schaefer were the two biggies.
Yeah, I've been on his podcast. We just go forever too.
All right. But with that said, to begin to wrap things up for this evening, in terms of where AI Wars 2 is now, or where it's going to be on early access, like for somebody watching us right now, they're live or recorded with the game coming out of early access next week. What is like the general state of the game right now?
So it is in a state where you can play it from start to finish.
Mhm.
Um, if you win, it just says you win. So there's no grand ending at the moment. Sorry about
Mhm.
that. All the music's in. We have more voice acting lines that are going to be in, but there's over 1,700 that are in there already. 25 actors. A lot of the art is in there. Like
Mhm.
um, the lobby should be finished by the time early access starts. Right now, it's a horrible interface. All the other interfaces are um, either done or further along. But the lobby is abysmal at the moment. But there's quick starts that make it so you can just click and get in without having to do the lobby. And if you're new, regardless of how the lobby is, the quick starts are a great way to get kind of a preset scenario that tells you,
Mhm.
um, this is a pretty reasonable scenario, and it has, some factions, and they'll in general be kind of like this, and you go, okay, that sounds cool, let's do that one. And they're still randomized, even though they have general starting shape. And so, um, we still have bugs to fix and, balance to tune and all that sort of thing, but there's nothing like real um, grand in there. It's just polish, that sort of thing. We are not having multiplayer yet. That's the really big item that is lacking at the start of early access. We're not even going to try and add that until um, probably first quarter of next year. I don't think I'm going to have time to really work on that until January. Um, Trying to have the multiplayer bug fixing and development and all that sort of stuff at the same time that the game design was evolving a lot was just too much. So we had working multiplayer for a long time, and we turned it off and said, okay, we're still going to code in a multiplayer safe way. We know we're about to break multiplayer in a variety of ways, and we don't want to take the time to continually fix it because thing, each time we go through a core design shift, it's going to break it in a different way. So we'll just fix it all at once later. And we've been doing multiplayer for a long, long time, so it's not a worry that we're not going to be able to or something like that. It's a pretty defined scope of what's going to happen with that. Um, but anyway, in order to not distract from the game design work that was going on, we set that aside. So once the game design stuff and most of the game content stuff is completely settled down, or almost completely settled down, then we'll turn to multiplayer and go, all right, now we need enough time to get this, fully in here and people testing that, happy and so on. So if you're wanting to play with friends, sorry about that for the next while, but it will be fully co-op, just like the first game, um, in next year.
All right. And you're already talking about 2019. I guess you have a rough idea of how long it will stay in early access for.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna beta 1.0 in second quarter. So I mean, at this point, we have you actually see it on my Trello, which is linked off of our forums at the very least, and um, it's got a list of all the things I plan on doing. And I don't think it's all inclusive because it doesn't have multiplayer, but aside from like multiplayer and adding some AI improvements in various ways. Um, it's got all of the line items for other interfaces we want to add and to make certain things easier and um, uh, various like new shortcuts for the keyboard and other like advanced play type things. Um, so it has all of those things as well as a list of all the mechanics that I plan on adding. Does not have a list of all the ships that we plan on adding based on those mechanics because we're going to make that up as we go. It's basically we came up with a whole big old pile of new mechanics. We said we're going to do these instead of the stuff we had in the first game because these are more interesting, and then we're going to build ships based off of those. So I know how long it's going to take to add the new mechanics, and then we're going to put together the new ships and do the art for those. That takes a pretty defined amount of time, and then it'll take a while to balance those. We'll just see how long that takes. But I mean, that kind of goes on in parallel to what we're doing. And since players can adjust the balance directly, and we have some volunteers that are helping out with kind of shepherding the balance, that's freed me up from having to do the details on that, which is really nice. It's been great force multiplier for me. So it makes it so that there's a pretty concrete scope for all the things. There's not a whole lot of things that we have to prototype, and we'll see if that is a good prototype. And then if it is, then we'll go with it. If it's not, then we're going to retool. We spent the last 2 years doing that, and oh my God, it went way longer than I thought it was going to. That was miserable. And I specifically was basically refusing to go to early access until we got past that point and we could actually have it defined, here's what we're going to do and why, and you can see it already. You know if you like it or not. It's going to be like this, but more stuff and more polished and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And, but what you see is the general idea sort of thing. So we've hit that point now. And that's part of why we're able to have a concrete scope like that versus still being in a prototype discovery phase.
I mean, it wouldn't have made sense to put LA Wars 2 on early access, again, before your two big pivots. Because, again, if you dramatically alter the game and you're selling people that copy of it, they're going to see that as kind of a betrayal of that concept. And, again, it's always tricky when it comes to going on to early access because of that very nature.
Right. And I mean, we had a Kickstarter, so I was worried we would still run into some of that. But fortunately, Kickstarter backers have a bit of a different mentality, and they didn't feel like they were buying a product that existed in a specific way. They didn't. We had a design document that was very specific, but also said, we may very well deviate from this in a variety of ways, and here's the big picture of the effects that we're going to try and get. But if this doesn't get those effects, we're going to change how we attempt to get those effects. And people agreed with that. We haven't had any complaints about the shift from any of our Kickstarter backers, which I am, by the way, all of you guys, thank you so much for that and for the support in general. And so, but that's dealing with 3,000 or so people, which is a smaller group than you run into on early access. So now that we're going to early access, it's a new ball game. So
and hopefully one we'll have a chance to catch up about in a few weeks as well.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, thank you for coming and listening to us ramble this whole time, by the way, foreign user.
Yeah, you've survived. You've made it through the entire cast. You're ready now.
That's right.
But again, there's still so much more we can talk about, and like you said earlier, we'll be sitting here as just skeletons. At one point, someone will just come onto the chat, we'll see two skeletons wearing blue and green shirts, and nobody's talking. This cast has been going on for this cast has been going on for 82 hours now.
Yeah,
there we go. But I always say, definitely the best of luck with AI Wars 2, Chris. And like I said, hopefully when we next chat, you'll have some good news to report regarding early access. And again, we'll have more discussions, I'm sure, in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's one of those cases where it's not like it has to. We're not banking on it doing, $1 million in revenue or something, to where we have to have that in order to stay afloat during early access or whatever. I have to borrow more money than I can, but it's not a whole lot of money that I have to make in order to bridge that deficit that I have every month at the moment. So if we can bridge that deficit, then I'll be happy. And it's going to be doing rather poorly indeed if it doesn't. So,
Yeah.
but still get it finished either way.
Right.
So,
Well, like I said, definitely good luck with it. And for people watching us record right now, are there any like social media you like to plug? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever.
um, the to be honest, I'm really lax on Facebook and Twitter. I'm on Reddit all the time.
Hmm.
My username is X4000 on there. Find me pretty easily. And I'm also, we've got our own forums and the Steam forums. If you go to arcengames.com/forums, or to the Steam page and click into the forums there, I am super easy to I'm super easy to reach there. I'm also X4000 there, but it has either Chris Park or parentheses or right under it, so you'll know it's me. You don't have to remember my weird username.
All right. I guess the final point then before I'll do my little end of podcast speech then is, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to say to the fans for us to wrap the cast up on?
Not really. I think I've pretty much said my piece. I mean, I really, really appreciate everything that everybody has done and the patience that everybody's had, because the schedule has been
Mm-hmm.
not what I envisioned, and that's been a case where we really could have had some angry people, but every time we've had schedule changes and so on, people have said, they bring out the Miyamoto quote of, rushed game is forever bad. Delayed game is eventually good, and they've brought out, take the time you need to, get it right, and have been really supportive. And I did not expect that. I mean, I don't know why. I mean, that's just, you don't usually have that. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, with Kickstarter or anywhere else, you just don't usually have that. And in the past, when I've had games, and even before early access, when I've just had private alphas of stuff and was getting coverage on like Rock Paper Shotgun, when you made like a Valley Without Wind 1 have schedule deviations or design deviations, get raked over the coals about that. And the game wasn't even out. Nobody had bought it. Nobody played it. They'd seen videos. It's like, come on, leave me alone. This is better. And you're like, I know it's better, but you made a mistake.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I know I made a mistake.
Yeah.
But none of that. I mean, are you kidding me? What is this? This is not the internet I know. So that's just really cool. And I'm really grateful for how people have reacted to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope people will enjoy, I'm glad to see that so many of our backers are already enjoying the game. And, finally, because there's a long period where it was like, yeah, no, not yet. It's not really fun yet. Thanks, though. So I'm glad that people are actually enjoying it now, and look forward to seeing more people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know a lot of people like really turned on the Stoneheart developers after the game. They decided to wrap it up while still not fulfilling everything, but they worked on the game for like 5 years at that point.
Oof, yeah, I missed that news item, but I followed it for a good long while. I didn't know they'd wrapped it up. That's yeah.
And again, like, we gotta be careful because we'll just like jump right back into another hour-long topic right now.
Yeah.
But if you wouldn't mind staying on the Skype call for like 1 minute after we wrap things up here, I just have a few things I want to go over with you.
I refuse.
All
No,
right.
it's good.
But we will say goodbye for now. But again, Chris, I always say, definitely don't be a stranger. I'm sure we'll have another 2 to 4 hour podcast in the wings in the coming weeks.
We gotta not have it be 2 years from now this time.
Definitely. But for everyone watching this either live or recorded, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching this record and would like this cast earlier and ad-free, be sure to check out the Patreon, patreon.com/JLBBicer to find out how. We have our own Discord channel linked down below where we hang out, talk game design, probably not like 4 or 5 hours at a time, but we do get into our discussions. But other than that, if you're watching this live right now, I may still do a game stream later on tonight. I'm still not sure yet, but we have regular streams around 9:30, 10 Eastern. And last but not least, if you are a developer watching this who would like to come on and chat, it doesn't have to be a 2 hour cast. We can certainly do 30 to 40 minutes like it's nothing. Please don't hesitate to get in touch. But check back for related discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where exactly they are in science of games. And be sure to check out. Oh wait, I'm up in the corner this time. So if I can angle this right, be sure to check out Chris's game AI Wars 2. It will be on early access by the time you're watching this recorded, and I'm sure I'll have a few videos up of me messing around and probably dying in hilarious ways to go.
That's the way to play. That's the most fun way. Nothing like a glorious defeat.
All right, so until next time, folks, have a great evening, and we will see you all again real soon.